The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back, comfortably zoned in a Vado Pine Tar with George Grimm and me. I'm Ralph Tycho, the authors of what I consider to be the I hate to say the best baseball book ever written. Best baseball book I've seen in a long time. So to prove that, we have a guest who's returning to these airwaves to talk about the book. You read it how many times? Twice, Jerry. Jerry Feitelberg. Welcome back. And George, of course, it's nice to have you back.
Thank you. Good to be here, Ralph. Nice
Good.
to be here,
You're both recovering, Jerry, from some very serious back surgery. And George, you had an eyelid problem. First, the back surgery. Jerry, how you getting along?
I'm doing fine, Ralph. I'm able to walk with using a cane or a walking stick. And in the house, I don't use anything to walk around. And it's been a little over 3 months from the surgery. I saw the doctor today. I had x-rays done, and he showed me it. You can't believe all the stuff that's in my back. I got all these cages. I got about 4 cages in my back from all the fusions I had done. But it's coming along, and I have no complaints. I'm very pleased with the progress. And it's I have to follow up in 3 more months, and hopefully when I start physical therapy, I'll be able to use the cane less and walk on my own.
Beautiful. That's music to my ears. I know how much you've gone through, just the preparation for the surgery. You really had to change your lifestyle a bit. You lost some weight. You ate less foods that would give you cholesterol. I think they asked you to reduce your cholesterol for one reason or another. And you're a good patient. And let me tell you, you're not the only patient on this line. George Grimm, tell us about your ordeal, if you would.
The only problem that I had was my eyelid. I had 2 eye surgeries last year, and it left me with a droopy eyelid, which I had to either hold up with my finger or with a Band-Aid every day. And if I had 3 hands, it would be great, but I don't. So I had to have it. I guess sewn up this week. They just kind of stitched it up a little bit, and it looked pretty bad. It looked worse than it was. It was all black and blue, and it's purple, but it's passing. It's getting better, and I go to my regular eye doctor tomorrow morning, and everything should be okay.
Good.
Yeah, it's a fairly common problem. My lovely counterpart Isla is going to have hers done, but she had to postpone it because of she hasn't been feeling well for the last 2 or 3 weeks. But she has a similar problem with the droopy eyelid, so Stanford's going to do it. I don't know when they reschedule it, but it'll be probably 2 or 3 weeks from now. So very common problem.
Yeah.
What's the recovery time generally, George?
Oh, I'll be all right by like next week. It could be a little discolored still, but it should be all right. And then in about a month, I want to get a new pair of glasses, and I think it'll be okay. You gotta be optimistic. So.
Good. Good. Also, my condolences to your wife and you as well. Your father-in-law passed away recently, and
Yes. He was a very nice man. He was a big Yankee fan, big Ranger fan, and he was a good all-around guy. He would give the shirt off his back to anybody, and he will be missed by his family and friends. That's for sure.
He's not suffering anymore. That's the upside.
That's a good thing. Yeah.
So it's all part of life, I guess. But this has been a horrible couple of weeks for everybody in terms of celebrity deaths and people that were just good people. Betty White, Bob Saget, and a person who died that Jerry's very familiar with, having grown up in Boston. And I made note of players who pass or coaches or whatever on the website, wishing them, rest in peace. That's the thing. It was Sam Jones, the best backboard shooting guard in basketball history. The expression, Sam Jones, you can bank on it. And tell us about sitting in the Boston Garden and watching him. Jerry.
It was fantastic. And back in those days, back in the late 50s and in the 60s, the Celtics did not draw as well as they do now. They were the second fiddle to the Boston Bruins. The Bruins would sell out Boston Garden, and the Celtics were lucky to fill it up. They did for the playoffs, but not necessarily during the regular season. So whenever I got a chance to go to the game, I would take the opportunity to go to the game. I remember one year I came home from school on spring break in April, and the Celtics were in the finals against the St. Louis Hawks at that time. And,
1958.
1958. And I took the MTA into Boston Garden, and for $5 I got a seat center court in the second deck. Oh, what's a ticket now? They're talking about an average ticket for a basketball game in the finals. You're looking at $750 for just to get in. It's unbelievable.
And that's just for the drinks. That's just for the Coke and popcorn. The tickets are extra.
Yeah, well, Sam Jones never made that money. But what happened with the Celtics is, Cousy and Sharman was the backcourt. And then when he put the second unit in, it was the Casey Jones and Sam Jones. And Auerbach realized that when he put the second unit in, they were outscoring the first unit. And he realized he had something. And then, of course, Sharman left, Cousy retired, and Casey and Sam took over the backcourt duties. And John Havlicek came along at that time. Larry Siegfried was on the team. And
Frank Ramsey was the fifth guard on that team. He was like Havlicek, a bit of a swing man, and
he was the sixth man.
Right.
He'd be the first guy off the bench. He was the sixth man. He was really outstanding, and he came out of Kentucky, and Cliff Hagan came out of Kentucky. I think they were teammates. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Easy Ed McCauley. He didn't go to Kentucky. I think he was from St. Louis, Washington University in St. Louis. But anyway,
involved in a very key trade that brought it all together. Bill Russell.
Yeah, Bill Russell.
Yes.
Yeah, the Bill Russell trade, and that made the dynasty for the Celtics, and they won 11 rings in 13 years, 11 championships in 13 years. And, of course, they're tied with the Lakers for the most championships in the NBA with 17 each. But you know who the number 3 team is with the most championships in the NBA? A team that you would never suspect because they were so awful for so many years. Who's the number 3 team with championships?
Dallas.
Nope.
Sandy. Jeez. You got me, Jerry.
How about the Golden State Warriors? They have 6 NBA championships. They're third in the league with the championship wins.
Whoa! Now, does that include the Philadelphia history as well?
Yeah, they had 2 from Philadelphia and 4 in San Francisco in Golden State. I forgot. I did mistake. They're tied with the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls had 6 in the 90s.
Right, with Jordan.
Yeah.
And took away a lot of Knicks possibilities, the timing of that, because the Knicks were very competitive, Patrick Ewing days and what have you.
Yeah, they were. The Knicks won 2. I think they won in 70 and 72 with who was their Willis Reed was their big
yes.
center. Yeah, and
absolutely.
he played.
Greg Holtzman was the coach. Walt Frazier.
Dollar Bill Bradley. Dave DeBusschere. Bibby coming off the bench. Barnett coming off the bench.
Yeah, Dave DeBusschere.
That was
Dave DeBusschere.
And then later, when Reed was hurt and had to retire, they got Lucas, which gave them Jerry Lucas, a great passer, fit right into Holtzman's system, and they want to. And what was really amazing about that era with Holtzman is that he brought in Earl Monroe to play with Walt Frazier in the backcourt.
Right.
And you would think that it could never happen, but they shared the ball and they won another championship. So that was tremendous days. Like with the Jets, though, it's been a long time.
Oh yeah.
So,
well, I got a little story about how I got in to see some of the playoff games between the Knicks and the Lakers. I was living in L.A. I was working in Santa Monica, and I had a young kid working for me, and he said, "How'd you like to go to the playoff games with me?" I said, "What do I have to do?" He says, "We're going to get in." I said, "How did you get in? How can you afford the tickets?" He said, "Well, Fred Schaus was the general manager of the Lakers, and I'm friends with his secretary, and I can get 2 tickets." He said, "We may not sit together, but we will get in to the Fabulous Forum," and we had seats in different sections of the forum, and I got to see the playoff games between the Lakers and the Knicks, which was kind of fun. It was really nice.
Oh wow. Yeah, I think that was the series where Jerry West scored 65 points, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe not. Maybe he just made a long basket or whatever. But I remember him being key in one of those games. It's all fading.
I saw playoff games at the Boston Garden with Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, and they had, but they never had a real big center, a really good center. They had guys that I think
Leroy Ellis for a while, and a lot of stiffs along the way. It reminds me of the Knicks center situation back in the days before Willis Reed. Bellamy came along and was very, very good. And they packaged him with Walter Comives and a few others to get to Busher. And it allowed Reed to go to center and completed that team. So, as a matter of fact, one of my guests last week on this podcast network was Ray Scott, who used to coach the Detroit Pistons. And we had a terrific reminiscence about the NBA and his role in it. And George and I talk about this all the time. We live Walter Mitty lives, and with this job, this is talking to people and getting the inside skimmy in sports. It's wonderful being a podcaster, and you enhance this show on a regular basis, Jerry. And of course, George and I have had 2 years now of an incredible relationship. We put together the book that Comfortably Zoned in Nevada Pine Tar, and we did it by having fun.
Yes, we did. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah, that a lot of good memories of that, George, and I'm very appreciative.
My pleasure.
What I like about the book, and I think I've told you this, is that you get the inside stories, the backstories on baseball. You don't necessarily get a lot of stats, and you don't get the slash line, and you don't get because that can be boring. Just he hit 312, 120 RBIs, 47 home runs, and if you do see all that stuff, but you just don't pay attention to it. But when you get the story, and I especially like the backstory on Fritz Peterson and what a scandal that was in 1973, and Mark Littell's story about how he became a big leaguer and the difference between what we see as a fan and what the ball players see and how they approach their game when they go out in the field, and how it's different from them, and it's totally different from a fan. Their perspective is different, and you get those insights which you don't normally get in a book that's a lot of the books are puff pieces about the players. That's just my opinion, though.
Well,
one thing, we don't have any fluff in this book. There's no fluff, no puff, no fluff.
No fillers whatsoever. We weren't looking to fill up X number of pages. As a matter of fact, we had far more than what we needed for the first book. And but I started to say that mostly the players that we interviewed, and we interviewed everybody in baseball. No matter what their job, we have someone with an official scorer, Michael Duca, the pharmacist of the A's, Jerry Feitelberg, and the first woman, Sherry Davis, who's been on this show with George. She was the first female public address announcer. And but my point is that we didn't go for the superstars, because the superstars don't really give you the inside skimmy. It's the people that sit around on the bench and watch the superstars and can articulate what they're doing. And so my point is, we're talking to real human beings, and try to get an inside look of what it took for people to do their jobs. Jerry, what's the number one thing you brought to the table for the A's when you were the pharmacist for them?
That's a good question, because a lot of the time the only time I got to talk to the players were when they were in the trainer's room and they're getting treatment. And, I did have one player who was utility player. He had 3 home runs in his lifetime as a ball player. But he could fill in. He could play for a second base, shortstop, third base if necessary. And his father he had used an anti-inflammatory drug and had an adverse reaction to it, or was allergic to it, or had a problem. So he would ask me questions about that, and I would give him the answers, and I hope I could help him out. And so, if the players wanted to know something, I had to be careful because I didn't know what the doctors told them, and I didn't want to contradict what the doctors were telling them. So, but I was available if they needed stuff, and several of them called me at the store, and several of them I talked to confidentially at the ballpark.
So, in answer to my question, it's probably your communication skills that made you good at what you did, as opposed to what you learned in pharmacy school about the medicines. It's how you communicate to people, and I guess that was it.
Well, one little story I have is, as you know, or you may not know, players cannot use chewing tobacco in the minor leagues. It's forbidden. But when they get to the big leagues, they have a different problem. They use smokeless tobacco. You see them chewing it and spitting it out in the dugouts or on the field. And Major League Baseball had a program, Joe Garagiola, and they had a former player. I think he played for the A's. His last name was Tuttle.
Bill Tuttle.
Yeah, and Tuttle had mouth cancer and he had several operations, disfigured. And the two of those guys would go around to the training camps and talk to the players about the use of smokeless tobacco. And Tuttle was there and said, "Don't let this happen to you." So one night I'm in the trainer's room, and I had a young guy who was about 24, 25 years old. He was big into smokeless tobacco. And so I said to him, that stuff is really bad for you and it can cause you a lot of problems. His answer to me is, well, red meat can kill you too. And I said, I'm wasting my time talking to this guy. So,
right.
We got to remember the kids in their 20s think they're indestructible and that they're going to live forever and they're not going to get any of these diseases, but they do. And so he was not receptive to my counsel, and I just said, okay, we'll talk about something else.
Yeah, you didn't bug him. He didn't bug you by antagonize the atmosphere by being so disagreeable. And actually, he's right in a certain way. Red meat can kill you, but getting hit by a car could kill you too. The whole idea is to cut down the odds and the probabilities. Sure. That's all you can do.
Absolutely.
Because we're blessed or cursed with a certain DNA, and that's just good. You have to make the best of it and try to get through it. But as you both know, nobody gets out alive. So that's why what we do is so important, because we bring a little levity, a little relief from the real world, and it's the candy store of life, somebody once said. I think it was Howard Cosell, who Howard Cosell always dreamt, if I remember correctly, of being a senator or reporting on world problems. He wanted to get into that type of. He was living the Walter Mitty life and wanted to get out of it. But anyway, what if you could think of anything that we hadn't talked about the book, your impressions? What do you say, Jerry?
Well, I enjoyed the book, and I bought a couple for Christmas presents. One for both of Isla's sons-in-law, so they can read the book. And one fellow's an A's fan, and I think Isla's other son, who works for the Warriors, is a Giants fan. But that's okay. But there are good stories in there, and they're, as I said, I love to read the stories, and because it's different and it's informative, and you get stuff out of it that you didn't know. You don't see it in the newspapers. So, I just enjoyed the book, and you could read it. There's so much in there to retain it all. That's why I had to read it twice, and I still don't retain it all. But I enjoyed it, and I think for anybody that's a fan of baseball and loves baseball history, they're going to love the book, especially the young people, because a lot of the young players have no history of the baseball game. They know as a player what they have to do. They get into the minor leagues, they find out how competitive it is, how everyone's trying to claw their way into the major leagues. And maybe that's why some of the guys who are doing PE say, the only way I'm going to get ahead, the only way I'm going to make it to the major leagues is I got to be better than this guy, and if I can get an edge, I'll get there. And we discussed the PEDs in the book. Bobby Estalella is in there with his his time in the big leagues, and he admits he did PEDs. And so I think that fans will get a better sense of what it's like to be a baseball player, what they go through, the grind. It goes. They start in February and they don't get done. Some don't get done until November, and a lot of the players are away from home all the time. A lot of them come from different backgrounds. Now we have players coming from all over the world. We want to know their stories. And that's what the book does. And there's so much more. You could do another book and fill them up with stories. For the players from the more modern era, rather than going back to the 50s with the Dodgers and the Giants and the Red Sox, Yankees. There are new teams and new stories being done every day. That's the magic of baseball.
Absolutely.
Good point.
George, anything to add?
On the book, no, not really. I think you guys covered it all. It was fun to work on, and I learned a lot. I thought I knew a lot about baseball, but I learned even more through working on the book, through listening to the interviews and podcasts, and I enjoyed it. I hope, and I'm really happy that people are enjoying it as well. It's a good book.
Yeah,
I would buy it. If I didn't write it, I would buy it. So I'll put it that way.
Right.
So.
How did writing it compare to writing your two hockey books that you had published? What was the process like with that? I know what the process was like with us, but what was the process of your writing the hockey books? Was it similar to what we did? You tell us.
Well, the process was using your mind and using my mind. I mean, for the baseball book, I used all your podcasts. You created them. You sat in on most of them, and that took care of that. As far as the hockey books, it was my memory, and I had to research that I got things right, and I had to call the players. You had the players already on tape. I had to call the players, and I had to get in touch with them, and I had to make that cold call, like, can you talk to me, please? And but they were all very nice, and I appreciated their time. And each book was different in its own way, but it's all part of the process of writing. You get used to what you have to do to get it on paper.
You had an idea of that you filled in the blanks with our book. In other words, you always had a plan, if I recall, what's going to go where, how it's going to be put together. You did a masterful job. You really did, and you did it without fuss. I attribute that to the fact that you're egoless. You had nothing invested in the decisions we made, nothing personally invested. It wasn't about that, and you understood right from the start that it's just about trying to get it right. And we communicate. I miss our weekly talks immensely, and I'm glad we're keeping up with this little podcast to tell people what the book is about. And hey, George, you want to tell the George Will story?
No, you tell it.
Okay. All right. Jerry might laugh at this. We're about halfway through the book, and we got to talking about other books and the premise of our book. And it turns out we both agreed that the premise was very similar to the book that George Will wrote. And when we talked about George Will's book a little bit, and remember, we're about halfway through, and we think we have the best thing since sliced bread going. And it's funny, it's interesting, it's compelling. And we talked about the premise of George Will's book and how it was so similar. And you mentioned right off the bat, you couldn't get through George Will's book. You couldn't get through what?
Was that the book that George Will wrote about working in baseball with LaRussa?
I think it was called Men at Work. I think.
Men at Work. Right. Right.
And it was done. I mean, LaRussa's interview was just an example of the whole book. You never got to know Tony LaRussa in any way. It was all a publicity thing for him, the way he contributed to it. And we both thank him for the premise. I think subconsciously that was our book, but on every level it was boring as hell. And so we describe it now that George Will is the poor man's George Grimm.
Who did we have on last week or the week before who brought up the George Will book? We had somebody on, and they started talking about George Will. We just both cracked up. I don't remember who
yeah, that's right. That's right. We did. There are things that we'll always have to laugh about that are indigenous to our experience. And it was great, George. I can't thank you enough. And from the book, it's led to my getting a little gig on Sirius Radio XM, Sports Byline, and Sports Overnight. I'm going to do a segment every couple of weeks with the co-host of that show, the host of that show, Fred Wallen, and we're going to do, based on the book a lot, we're going to talk about the best rivalry in baseball history. Now, Jerry may disagree. He may say it's the Red Sox and the Yankees.
Absolutely correct.
All right, I had you covered. But you can't imagine the proximity of these two teams, because Boston and the Yankees were separated by hundreds of miles.
Couple hundred, 230 miles to be exact, but who's counting?
All right. Well, who is? I'm sure you've made that trip many times. Yep. Our premise of having the Dodgers and Giants being the best rivalry, it was what contributed to it was the close proximity. There were not only two, there were three teams in New York City. And New York isn't that big. It has a populace, but it really is not a large city. And what contributed to that rivalry was the proximity in which the teams were located. That's my thing. And plus, New York and all about it, and Jackie Robinson and Brooklyn, and Willie Mays with the Giants. We're going to have a lot to talk about starting this weekend. It's on sport. It starts at 10 o'clock Pacific, and it's 2 nights. They tape it over the weekend, and I'm going to enjoy it immensely. So, but again, it all comes from the book. So already it's improved my professional life, as it were, tenfold. So thank you again, George, for being.
Yeah, and Ralph, remind the listeners that it's on Sirius XM Radio, channels 203 and 207.
Wow! You take notes, incredible notes, Jerry. Thank you. It is that. It's also on all the apps, which there's YouTube and this, that, and the other thing, and TuneIn and Skechers, and so it's the next challenge for me, and I'm looking forward to it very much. I'm also looking forward to an interview that George and I have coming up with Stan Fischler, the great hockey writer, and it's the equivalent of my doing an interview with Peter Golenbach way back, my first interview with him, talking about the top writers in the world. We have Hal Bach, David Nemec. This is a great network, and I'm proud of it. And George and Jerry are both contributors that really put us over the top. So thank you both, guys.
Ralph, one more point. If you ever want to get a hockey maven to talk with George, I'm recommending Len Shapiro. Len worked for the California Golden Seals back in the 70s when Charlie Finley was here, and he's extremely knowledgeable about hockey. He's done a lot, and he'd be a good fit for the show. Len Shapiro. I'll get the information. I'll forward the information to Ralph, but I'll send you a message. I got Len's phone number if you want to call him.
Beautiful. Let me ask you this: he seems to have two Facebook identities, one with a picture and one without a picture. Which one is the real Len Shapiro?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have. I don't. I just usually talk to Len. I don't use his Facebook page. I'll have to look it up.
Okay. That would be terrific. George, are you up for that?
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. Where did he work in the SEALs organization? What did he do?
I don't know what Len did back in those days, but he was a very successful entrepreneur. He owned several Round Table Pizza shops in California, and but he knows the Sharks, he knows the NHL, he knows everything. So he'd be a great guest, and he also did some work for the Raiders. And of course now they moved to Las Vegas, so he doesn't work for them anymore. And he loves radio. He's big in old time radio in San Francisco. So, and for us that grew up on the East Coast, I grew up listening to hockey on radio. I listened to the great Fred Cusick do the Boston Bruins games for many years.
Yeah.
And I was covering hockey for Sports Radio Service for a couple of years, and the Montreal Canadiens were in town, and I was down in the lunchroom having dinner, and I was sitting with one of the Canadiens personnel, and I was telling him the first game I ever saw at Boston Garden was between the Montreal Canadiens and the Boston Bruins. And I was sitting way up in the rafters. You know how much it cost me to get in to see the game?
Probably $3.
75 cents.
Yeah. Okay.
You must have had a Geo card.
Yeah.
Did they call it?
I was, 12, 13 years old. Come on. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. Okay.
But I got to see the great Maurice Richard play. And against our Boston Bruins. I don't remember who the goalie was, but I think Milt Schmidt was still playing when I saw him, and that goes way back. Yeah,
that goes way back. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
You had a great story for me the other day about the Bruins, George. You mentioned a potential trade of Earl Ingerfield for who was it? Was it Johnny Busick?
Yeah, the Rangers, Emil Francis tried to trade Earl Ingerfield to the Bruins for Johnny Busick. The Bruins had a new general manager named Hap Emms, E-M-M-S, and he was new in town, and Emil grabbed a hold of him, and Emil needed a left winger for his Gilbert and Littell combination, and the Bruins were looking for someone, who could play center, and the Rangers, and they were all set to trade Ingerfield for Busick. Now, Ingerfield, is a fine player, but he was no Johnny Busick. So the owner of the Bruins said, no, you can't make that deal. So that's where it went. It just never happened. But Emil had Johnny Busick on the left side of Rattel and Gilbert, he would have been all set for a while. He wouldn't have had to put Vic Hatfield there, and Busick.
No, I think Hatfield was the left winger. Hatfield was the left winger. Rattel was the center.
Yeah, and Gilbert was the winger.
Yeah. That was my first line as a kid. The number one line for the Rangers when I first started was Prentice, Ingerfield, and Andy Bathgate.
Mm-hmm.
So
I remember.
That was it. It and them. They didn't win until much later. What was it? 95?
1994.
94. Wow.
Yep.
That's a long time between championships.
1940, it was 54 years, yeah. So, wow.
You guys will both agree that there is something that is so special about hockey that can't be compared to other sports, because the skills involved are so eclectic. You have to skate, you have to fight, you have to dig the puck out, you have to set things up. Just a great sport to watch. And one of the things I most regret about leaving New York was that television doesn't transcend to hockey, and I just didn't have it in my life all these years.
Yeah.
But I do want to thank or mention that you mentioned the Montreal Canadiens a few moments ago. Reminds me that Guy Lafleur, terrific Hall of Famer, he's struggling with some sort of cancer or blood disease or what have you. And, it's like anything else. It's like our families. You grow up rooting for these guys, and they're mortal, and they experience illness and sickness and mortality. So it sucks. But he's still with us, and I want him to hang in there for us at Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Guys, this was terrific chatting. All we do is kibitz, and that's all I want to do. So, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you,
problem,
Ralph.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Enjoy. Bye-bye.
Okay, we will talk to you when we do. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Comfortably Zoned in Nevada Pine Tar. George Grimm is my co-host and my co-author when we wrote the book, and one of my favorite human beings. It sounds like a backhanded compliment, because there are so few of my favorite human beings out there, but it isn't. Jerry Feitelberg, love having you as a friend. I'm thrilled that you recovered from this, and that we'll be seeing each other in a couple of weeks.
Looking forward to it.
The 25th, I got it down.
Okay, great. Fantastic.
All right. George, be well. And all right. Thank you for listening, everybody. Adios. Happy trip.
Adios. Bye-bye.
So long. Bye-bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.